Now that we are able to display data, let's try to edit one of the records. Again, you can create your own form and create all the interface, or you can simply drag and drop the table that you want to edit onto the background of the form. Notice that you cannot drag it over to an existing control, you must drag it to the background of the form. The wizard pop-ups again, but this time let us select the Create a Form based on the Database Table option with SQL statement. Let us edit all the columns and press Done. A new form has been created, holding a text box and a label for each column that we've selected. Let us see how Kalipso fetches data from the database to display it on the screen. For that, we go to the form properties, double-clicking on its background into the Actions form. We can see that a select has been executed. If we open it, we can see that column code from table articles is being placed into input code. Column name from table articles is being placed into input name, and so on. If we check out the where, we can see that it's empty, for Kalipso doesn't know which specific record we want. That's the first problem we have to solve. We want to open on this form a record selected on this form. The first problem that we face is that we cannot access objects between forms. So, from this form, we cannot access objects on this form. But there's a certain type of objects that are common to all the forms. They are the global variables. You have 1000 global variables that you can use. Which value? It's always the same regardless of the form where you are. Let's start by using global variable 0, calling it product code. We save, and now we go to the grid that we've created, content, column code. And as we define a source for the column, let's also define a target. Obviously, we are going to say that we want to store the column value on variable product code. We say OK, and we press Save. If we test our project, this time we don't need to generate a data file. My simulator behaves just like the mobile device. So the data stored there from the previous test is still there on this new test. The only thing that will be updated is the project itself. So I don't need to generate data file again. We can now see here on the right global variable product code as empty. But if we select one of the records, we can see that it takes the value of the column code. So now we can positively say that on this form, when the select is performed, we want to get this where the product code equals the value of variable product code. Notice that the column is added with a different syntax that you are used to. You don't need to mesmerize it because all you have to do is double click here on the column you want to use. Another thing that you don't need to worry is about the use of single quotes. For instance, this is an alphanumeric column, and notice that I'm not defining any single quotes around the value coming from the variable. If you want to use anything else, you use it just like in regular SQL. You can use the AND operator or parentheses, functions, and so on. We press Save. we can collapse the error management and we press save. All we have to do now is to open this form from this form. For that, we are going to the grid, actions, and say on the double click, I want to show the form that we've just created. And we press save. Save and test the project. If we double click carrots, we can see the carrots product being displayed. If we double click pork chops, we can see the pork chops product being displayed. We can even change the name to whatever we want and press the save button. Notice that this value hasn't changed, but if we double click it again, we can see that on the database it is changed. And notice that nothing has been changed on the server, for we are working in offline mode. Thus, we are only working on the database of our mobile device. Now, the problem is we haven't refreshed this object. Thus, this representation of the database is no longer reliable. We need to refresh it again. We can close. And our biggest problem is that we cannot say on this form that we want to refresh this object, because we cannot access objects from other forms. Let's take a look at the actions. We are saying that we want to show the form to edit the record. Notice that when we call the show form action, the open form takes over control of the application. Thus, it only stops when it's closed. This means that if we place actions after this action, they will only be executed when this show form ends, which only ends when the open form gets closed. So we can say here that we want to refresh the control that we have created previously. We can collapse the error management, and we know for sure that this action is only executed after this form is being closed. We press save and test our project again. We can see that the value has changed on the previous session, of course. Let's try to put it back to its rightful name. We double click and we erase all of this. We press save, and now we can see that the refresh was executed and the value was refreshed on the screen. Going back to Kalipso Designer, let's check out how Kalipso has saved my record. If we check the actions of button save, there's a very good example on how the collapsing of the error management is useful. If we right click and say, OK, collapse on error, we can see that it gets much more clearly. Basically, Kalipso has built this form either to insert records or to update records. It says, if the record exists, we update, otherwise we insert. Let's check out how Kalipso is checking if the record exists. We double click and we can see that this is a condition calling a function called lookup. You don't need to memorize the syntax of functions, because you can simply put the cursor above the function name and press F2. This opens the edition of the function itself and also allows you to read it in a very easy way. So we are checking the existence of records on table articles where the code equals the value on input code. If this returns true, the record exists, so we update. Otherwise, we insert. If we want, we can simply assume that this form is just to update records. Thus, we can right-click on the selected actions and simply comment them. We press save, and since we are assuming that this form is just to update existing records, we can double click also on the input code and say that the user cannot edit the product code. If we test it again, if we double click, for instance, cabbages, we can see that we can no longer edit the product code. We can set cabbages to cabbages and press the save button.